All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming today. My name is Jett. I'm a correspondent governor here at the FCC. It's so great to see you here today. This is our first live event, first live club lunch, I believe, since February. So it's been a while, and we're really happy to see everyone here in person. We've been holding a lot of events on Zoom during the restrictions, and we're going to continue to do that. But we have a great lineup of live club lunches coming up this summer as well, for those of you who are staying in town. The flyers haven't gone out yet, but I know we'll be having events on the war in Ukraine, the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. We'll be having another, one of our popular COVID updates, so please be on the lookout for those. Just a couple of reminders for this event, which I believe is being live streamed and recorded, so please remember to silence your phones. And we will have some time for Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions until then. So we're very pleased today to welcome our speakers, starting with Keith Richburg, who is president of the FCC and director at the University of Hong Kong's Journalism and Media Studies Center. We also have Ronson, chairperson of the Hong Kong Journalists Association, former deputy assignment editor at Stand News, and now deputy assignment editor at Channel CHK. And joining us on Zoom, we have Sharron, a senior lecturer in media law at the University of Hong Kong. Thank you all for joining us today to talk about press freedom, a topic that has very much been in the news. I think we're all familiar with the events of the past year, but just to give you a partial rundown, Apple Daily, Stand News, Citizen News, and other publications have been shut down or decided to shut down on their own. Journalists have been arrested. The Hong Kong Journalists Association is having serious discussions about its future as it faces growing pressure. And late last month, the FCC announced it was suspending the Human Rights Press Awards after 25 years, citing the risks posed in the current political climate. In this month's World Press Freedom Index, released by Reporters Without Borders, Hong Kong dropped from 80 to 148, lower than Singapore and even Cambodia. Yet John Lee, Hong Kong's new chief executive, says there is no need for him to defend press freedom, which he says still exists and is protected by local laws. So the first question I would ask our speakers is, what's your take on that? What is the state of press freedom in Hong Kong? Keith, do you want to start?
Sure. I've said before, and I'll use the same analogy. I say it's press freedom is still here, but it's been badly damaged and hanging by a thread, I would say. It obviously all the things you mentioned are real, and that's what contributed to Hong Kong's drop to 148th place on that list. Now you could quibble with, should it be below Philippines where journalists get killed? Should it be below Cambodia where journalists have been killed? But you could quibble with where Hong Kong is, but definitely there's been a massive drop over the last year because of all of those things you just mentioned. But I would just add a couple of things there. Press freedom mean, in addition to all of those things you mentioned, Apple Daily, Stand News being shut down, what we had to do here at the FCC, press freedom means more than that. It means journalists having access to information. And right now we're seeing access to information being criminalized, in terms of vehicle records, corporate records. Freedom of the press means being able to stand up and ask questions at a press conference without the journalist being attacked online for saying you shouldn't have asked that question and having their own news outlet having to apologize. It means not having the government write letters back threatening journalists because of editorials or articles. Now, look, all over the world, if the government doesn't like something that's printed, they have the right to kind of write in and say, look, you got this wrong, et cetera. But here it came accompanied by threats. Don't forget, it's illegal to tell people not to vote. Look at Brand Hong Kong sometime, and you see these letters being written that kind of carry veiled threats of legal action. And it also means not using visas as a weapon, as the Hong Kong government has seemed to do in some cases, where journalists who need visas to come to Hong Kong to work are having their visas denied or having them delayed. So press freedom means all of those things, in addition to the actual frontal assaults on media. So yeah, look, but is there still press freedom in Hong Kong? Yes, there is still some. It's still free. We still have the free flow of information here that you don't have on the mainland, for example. You still see some robust debates in SCMP and other outlets about whether zero COVID is a good policy or whether it's not working. You don't have that debate in the mainland. When the head of WHO came out and said zero COVID is unsustainable, we could all read that here. They can't read that in the mainland. So there still is some degree of press freedom here that you don't have in the mainland. And there's a lot more press freedom than you have in some other authoritarian countries where I've worked as well. So there is still some. It obviously has taken a huge hit. It's hanging on, but there's still going to be some press freedom here at the moment, as long as there's still, brave journalists who are still out there reporting things, and there's still some debate and discussion going on in media.
I think we could take our masks off, right?
I think so, yeah.
Let's do that.
Is it safe, or we'll penalize with it?
If anyone knows differently, please let us know.
I'm boosted and did a rat test, so I'm okay.
So Ronson, what's your view on press freedom in Hong Kong?
Well, I've prepared a long speech today. I suppose that I will have a stand and I can have a very formal way to express my views, but it's okay that I would say, yes, we started from saying closure of about Apple Daily, Stand News, and also Citizen News. I have many friends worked in Apple Daily. They have closed for 322 years. No, not years, sorry. It's days, okay. Still 7 senior management staff are remanded, and the case is expected to transfer to High Court in the later of this year. And for Stand News, okay, which I worked before, we have closed around 145 days. My former and incumbent editors-in-chief are remanded, and also Citizen News that they have closed for around 139 days. And luckily that no one has been arrested or remanded, but luckily you still can read the Facebook page and the website of Citizen News. Okay. Honestly, for most of the Hong Kong people, that you won't feel what had really changed for your daily life, because if you don't have any friends or relatives working in this free company, if you only watch TV programs or news that as normal as you before, you won't feel what had changed. Mm-hmm. But for us, the journalists understood that the change is changing every day. For example, very easy to find case, the situation of Shanghai. You can have lesser and lesser news or information about what has Shanghai happened in the past month, okay? But you can find many information in Telegram group, in WhatsApp group. You can see many video clips, short clips saying that what had happened in Shanghai. If you go into the newspaper store today, you will see there is less and lesser choice, less and lesser magazine that which related to the people concerned topics in Hong Kong. And so for me, that I would say press freedom is not only a topic for JA or FCC, but it's a topic concerned by the whole community and the public. But of course, until today, that most of us, or the Hong Kong people, were not as alert with this, that your information access is reduced and reduced. Today, that this reducing will not affect you most, but one day that it may affect you. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine and I can't forecast what kind of topic that will that will affect the people most. But for we, the journalists, scholars, understand that it will happen today.
And Sharron, I wanted to hear from you as well, given your background in media law. I know you've been looking at these issues closely. What's your view?
Thank you, Jennifer. Is my audio satisfactory?
It's good.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean, it's really impossible to avoid the facts. So we have the shuttering of independent media, the arrests of journalists in numbers that are really disproportionate to the size of their profession, rejection of working visas, precipitous decline of Hong Kong, which has been mentioned on the Global Press Freedom Index. So I think it's disingenuous to suggest that all of these individual clear indicators of decline are somehow, they have no connection, or they're just oddly timed coincidences that don't have any bearing on fundamental rights and freedoms that are guaranteed under the Basic Law. So the starting point is we know what we've lost. For me, I think as an educator, it's difficult for me to agree with any conclusion on the state of life or proof of life of press freedom in Hong Kong. And that could be because I have this unusual privilege of being in a position as an educator where every semester I get to see the future of press freedom, mostly face-to-face, in the lecture halls of Elliott Hall at Hong Kong University, where I'm very privileged to be able to discuss these topics with cohorts. So for me, the future of press freedom is really how it is alive and well in the minds of the dozens and dozens of young students who their tenacity, their dedication to the principles of profession, these have not diminished, even in the face of the climate of uncertainty that is really the cloud that hovers over Hong Kong right now. So for me to take a public view on the state of press freedom, to say that it's dead and it's finished in Hong Kong, that is a disservice not only to remaining independent outlets, the community of freelance reporters, but it's also a disservice to the next generation of journalists who persevere and who call Hong Kong home. So it's not a light conclusion to arrive at, and particularly given there is a climate of self-censorship and fear, and that dominates a lot of discussions on freedoms in Hong Kong. But it's, at the same time, also not a view that I would wish to be interpreted as diminishing the very real concerns in Hong Kong, the agony over editorial decisions, and that the media outlets in Hong Kong are forced to endure on a daily basis.
Given that changed environment, what do you all think this means practically for journalists' work and the way they should actually operate going forward? Ronson, you want to go first?
I would say that Hong Kong people still need facts, still need truth, and still need news. Maybe that there will no longer the big and a very large scale media organization with a relatively independent stand, some more small scale or website or news page that they can still exist. For example, the closed free media that the people over the work in this free media before, they have set up some relatively small news website or pages, and the concern with such less sensitive topics. For example, they would concentrate on city news, in crime news, in horse racing news, car news, even food news or restaurant news. Okay, they can still obtain their job. They can still do what they have done before when they, for example, saying in Apple Daily. Okay, I've counted in this morning that in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, that this website contains around over 1 million likes or subscription. Okay, so I think that the staff and the colleagues and the journalists in Hong Kong are still willing to work harder and harder. But they know, of course, that some sensitive topic have to be alert. Okay, but it is not no way to continue our work or our, say, monitor to the community. But the way is simple, that at the past, after the handover, we are talking about how to change or how to make Hong Kong more democratic, and then we can change our society and community better and better. But today, that it seems that it's not easy to talking about changing the system or democracy. Okay, then we focus on how to change and how to improve our community better and better. We're talking about policy on government. We're talking about transport policy. We're talking about how to reduce crime rate. We're talking about how people get more good to eat. Well, okay, for the food or restaurant news. Okay, so we have to recognize that the environment has been changed, and it changed that we cannot look back, or even that we cannot get back of the good old days. But there is still jobs and mission for the journalists in Hong Kong.
Keith, what do you think this means for the way journalists operate now?
I agree with Ronson on that, which is there's still good journalism to be done. Journalists have to be a little bit more clever about knowing where the red lines are in the sensitive areas, but there's still so much important work that can be done. And and I don't think journalists should just throw up their hands and say, oh, because we can't operate the way we did 3 or 4 years ago, therefore we can't do anything. And it's so important. And we see good journalism being operated in places that are even more restrictive now than Hong Kong. We still see good journalism coming out of mainland China. The reason we know what's happening in Shanghai is because people are reporting it. It's coming out. So you can still do journalism here, but again, if journalists have a choice here, they can either start looking back and saying, oh, well, we can't do the things we used to do, so therefore we can't do anything, or they can say, look, we can still hold government to account. And you're starting to see a little bit of that. I think you're starting to see, this debate going on about whether the government screwed up the 2 years they had of COVID-free Hong Kong and didn't get enough vaccines in the elderly people's arms, or why were they only now going door to door to take vaccines to elderly people? Again, I mean, it's even more critical now, I think, for the journalists to play that role of speaking truth to government, because we don't have an opposition in LegCo anymore. So who's going to bring up these questions? If it's not the media, if a top police officer is going to get a massage in an illegal joint, that came out in the press, that came out in the media. These are the sorts of things that journalists still should be doing to hold government to account, and not just. And again, we know what the national security law says the 4 basic, no-go areas are, which are treason, subversion, sedition, secession, and collusion with foreign forces. But that still leaves a whole lot of areas that you can report, especially when you're trying to hold government to account for its actions. And you're starting to see a little bit of that now. Even now, the government said they want to give a big pay raise to civil servants. You're starting to see stories saying, hold on a second, why are we doing this? Here's opposition to this, So, again, the role of the press is to find the areas that you can report on, hold government to account. I'm a little bit nervous that the law still has this kind of vagueness to it. For example, when they talk about inciting hatred against the police or inciting hatred against the government, I'm not sure how those terms could be used to try to criminalize legitimate reporting or critical reporting. But at the moment, I think journalists need to stop looking backwards and start looking forwards. And again, that's what we tell our students: just keep going out there and doing a job. Make sure your stories are bulletproof. Make sure everything is accurate, because accuracy is your best weapon.
I have a question for
please, yeah,
to Keith. That some media friends say after reading your newsletter, saying that you are too optimistic for the situation. Do you think so?
I try to be an optimist. I'm always I've reported. I've been reporting from authoritarian countries for 30 years, and many of them more restrictive than Hong Kong. I first went to Cambodia in 1986. First went to Vietnam in 1987. I was reporting from Indonesia in the late 80s. I got kicked out of Indonesia for not knowing where the red lines are and writing something in a way I shouldn't have written it. And once I got back in 2 years later, I realized that, I can still say the same thing, but you just have to say it in a bit more careful way. You have to, for example, in those days, Suharto was in charge in Indonesia. He was a dictator. I actually wrote a story saying Suharto was a dictator, military dictator. I got banned for 2 years. Later on, I said, oh, Suharto, who took power after an aborted communist coup, staged, put together an authoritarian system. There are ways you can say the same thing and not get kicked out. I've reported from Thailand. Nobody actually says what everybody knows is true about the monarchy in Thailand, but they know ways around it. Same thing in China. There are ways. I've never had a problem getting a visa going in and out of the mainland because but I think I wrote some pretty good stories there, but there are ways you learn to navigate the red lines. I think the problem in Hong Kong is everything is new.
Yes.
And in mainland, they know where the red lines are, and they know how to navigate them.
Enjoy the freedom of press for around more than 100 years.
Exactly.
That before the Qing Dynasty fall, that
Exactly.
we have press freedom in Hong Kong.
Exactly.
Some way. So it's very hard for the journalists to familiar with the situation now.
It's hard to adjust.
Yeah.
You went from a place that was almost totally free, according to Reporters Without Border Index, down to below Philippines and below Cambodia.
Mhm.
It's a tough transition.
Okay.
Sharron, what's your view on the red lines that journalists have to navigate now, and what should they be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I mean, if there are definite, I'm more of a realist than an optimist. And in my view, if there are definitive red lines, I am really at a loss to elaborate them. I think what has changed, well, let me start with what's always been true and consistent in the instruction of media law. And that is that the primary focus of, is the concern. The concern for prospective journalists must guide your actions. That has always been true of the instruction of media law. And this is from institutional integrity perspective and also the integrity of profession. So my role is really to ensure that all of the prospective journalists that we teach have a very solid foundation, best international journalistic practice, they're familiar with ethical codes, the codes that govern their conduct, that they report objectively and they include all sides in their stories. So all of these practices remain the same. And in media law, I guess I have a very wide basket. I mean, I have to teach every single law that may have intersection with the context of professional reporting. And so that's a very aggressive and ambitious kind of course. We have an unearned reputation as being a very difficult space, but it's just a lot of content. So including everything, we do access to information, copyright, defamation, and of course, free expression. So the instruction of these laws generally remains the same. We follow the same pattern. We look at the ordinance, we look at the offense, we look at the elements of the offense, we explain the defenses, and then we look at case law in Hong Kong and globally. So the change for me is very clear, is this profound sense of uncertainty. And not just among academics, but even legal practitioners will probably admit that they are at a loss to predict how and where the NSL will be applied. We have seen it retroactively applied to publications that came prior to the promulgation of the NSL. We've seen it applied prior to publication as a pre-crime kind of offense. So we're really uncertain what type of coverage or activities are going to be deemed threats. And that really leaves me with the view that I would not be as certain as to what the red lines are. There definitely isn't that sense of clarity coming from either the legal community or the profession at the moment. And it's something, if we are looking forward, then it's something that we need to actively pursue, is that clarity, that transparency, and that predictability that is fundamental to the continuance of any form of press freedom in Hong Kong.
Ronson, I wanted to ask you about the Journalists Association, which has come under attack in recent months. What can you tell us about the situation there and what you see for its future?
Well, we are going to have a annual general meetings in next month, okay, in late June, and we will still hold the election for the next term of the JA. We also will raise a motion for lower our dissolution standard or marks, saying that reduced to the total number of the members, half of us agree to dissolute, and we can disband. But I still have confidence that the JA still can exist in the future. But of course, for me, I've said it publicly that because I have a fellowship program in Oxford, I will go to study in October. So I won't actively trying to seeking to run next term chairperson. Okay, I hope that those people have their passion on JA, then they can try to do so. This is what I can tell you here now.
And Keith, a similar question for you. There has been a lot of criticism of the FCC's decision to suspend the Human Rights Press Awards,
Wow.
and it's raised questions about what the role of a club should be. What do you think this means for the FCC going forward?
But we have to be, as I said about journalists operating here, we have to be a bit more clever. We have to navigate these kind of complex issues. That was an unfortunate decision that we had to suspend the Human Rights Press Award. Just a bit of background on that, and thanks for asking, because I wanted to clarify that. You know, the last year, Amnesty International, who was our partner, our founding partner, decided they were going to leave Hong Kong, and so therefore they couldn't be our partner anymore. At the same time, CUHK, which was the administrator of the awards, decided it was too sensitive and they could no longer be the administrator of the awards. So Ronson and I spoke, I think on WhatsApp. I said, so what do you want to do here? Because these guys were under a lot more pressure. We were at the time, and they said, maybe you better leave us out of it now. Maybe, you know, we'll just keep us as a founding partner and et cetera. So it was FCC. So FCC board had a decision to make. Should we try to continue the awards? We've done it for 25 years successfully. Should we just try to have it for a 26 year or not under these pressures? We lost our founding partners. You know, CUHK didn't want to administer it anymore. So we decided, oh, well, let's just try to do it ourselves. We'll hire an administrator to do it, et cetera. But I did ask that administrator who we hired, a contractor, I said, by the way, before we announce the winners, just flag me if there's anything that's going to be problematic. And sure enough, he sent me an email. Once the judges were finished, we have nothing to do with the judging. It's all an independent judging group. And once the judges were finished, the administrator compiled it, and he sent me back an email saying, yeah, there are going to be some that are problematic here. And I haven't announced the list of winners because it's in fairness to all of them, but you guys have all seen them published here. So how you know who I'm talking about. And he sent me back a list saying, look, these are going to be really problematic. And at the end of his email, he said, I think we're going to be investigated because of this. I said, oh, okay, now what do we do? So I took this to the board, you know, the Press Freedom Committee, and to the board, and said, look, these are potentially problematic, some winners. So we debated this long and hard. It was the most intense board meeting I think I've ever had. We decided, should we give the awards to some, and then withhold the ones that we think are going to be problematic, or can we give them in secret to the ones that we think might cause problems? You know, I sought out advice from people who I trust here and some lawyers, and they all said, yeah, if you go ahead and do this, there's a really good chance you might be violating the law, or at the very least you could be investigated for violating the law. So what does being investigated mean? Well, first of all, you know, the club is people, it's not a building. So they would investigate the board. We're the ones legally responsible for the club. It might mean police coming and asking for our membership list. It might mean police coming and asking for the list of judges who gave these awards. And some of the judges actually asked that their names not be made public. So, but if we're investigated, we're asked to give the list, we'd have to give the list. So all of these things were kind of weighed in here at the time. And so after, as I mentioned, very emotional and intense debate, we figured there was no way we could move forward on this and preserve the integrity of the awards. So we decided to suspend the awards. The names all leaked out, you know who they are. And I'm very happy that a former administrator of Human Rights Press Award, who just left Hong Kong U last year and took up a post in Arizona, he rang me immediately and said, I'll take it. I'll do it again. I've done it before. And he's also working with a couple of other Asian press clubs that I can't announce yet because they haven't okayed it. So it's going to be fine. It's going to go on. It's going to be bigger than ever. He's talking to a couple of other media outlets who are putting more money into it. It's going to be fine. Winners, he told me, will all be recognized, but we just couldn't do it here. And it's a sad state of affairs on press freedom in Hong Kong that we couldn't do it here. So this was a regrettable decision that the board had to make. But I mean, again, I had to think in the interest of the staff of the club, the judges, and also, you know, we have assets in the bank, and we know what happens when they've launched investigations into, you know, PTU and other organizations, Apple Daily, Stand News. The first thing they do is freeze your assets. While there's an investigation, if they freeze your assets here, we can't pay our vendors, we can't pay our staff, and that's the end of the FCC. So, you know, I know it caused a bit of controversy because some people, you know, on the Press Freedom Committee said we should have just gone full steam ahead. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. Let's man the barricades on this one. But again, the board that's responsible for this decision voted 15-1, near unanimously, and that's a majority of correspondents and journalist members who just said, there's just no way we can do this without putting the club in serious legal jeopardy. And that's just not something I was going to do as president. That's not something that most of the board members are going to do.
So if the awards aren't being held and statements are being put out very carefully, what should the role of the club be, or what discussion needs to be had?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm sure that's going to come up when we have our you're having your annual general meeting and AGM in June. We're having ours next week. I'm sure that'll be discussed greatly. I think there's still things we can do here, but again, we have to do it within the law. We always obey the law, and we have to know when we can be smart about it. And again, we have to know when we can navigate the red lines if we can. You know, I think there's still a role for the FCC here. And again, as some of these things I mentioned before, access to information, journalists being able to stand up and ask questions at press conferences, not the government not weaponizing the visa process. These are all things the FCC can still speak out about and should speak out about. We've had workshops for journalists where we've invited local journalists in to get kind of hostile environment training, and you're seeing the need for that. And now in places like Ukraine, there's still things the FCC can do here, but there may be some instances where we say, well, this is going to be treading a little bit too close to a red line that might get us a police investigation and get the whole club shut down. So maybe we better hold back on this one. So I know some friends, I think they're still friends, think that we should just be absolutists about it. If we can't have the Human Rights Press Award, we shouldn't do anything. We should just shut down and be a drinking club. I don't agree with that. I think as long as we can still make a difference here, we should still be here and make a difference.
They're afraid and thinking that the role of protect press freedom, this role has been weakened.
Of course it's been weakened, but we're living in China now. Look, I saw some of the people, I actually, thank goodness I stayed off Twitter for the last several weeks, so I didn't have to see most of it. I realize how much extra time I have, but some people sent me stuff, people on Twitter, and I've noticed people sitting in London and who have left Hong Kong or couldn't get into Hong Kong, or people sitting in New York who have left Hong Kong saying, the FCC is kowtowing to China. I've seen this. FCC is kowtowing to China. And my answer to them is, well, it's really easy for you to say that from London and New York and Washington because we live in China. Which part of Hong Kong SAR China don't you understand? We live in China. We have to deal with the rules in the place where we are, and we have to be smart about it. And again, I mean, people who said we should have gone ahead and done this, done the Human Rights Press Award, fine. I respect that as a principled position. My question is, once I laid out the potential legal jeopardy, and nobody threatened us, this was all just us saying, here's what could happen. Once I laid that out to you, the possibility that we might have our assets frozen, we could have our membership list taken by the police, we could have our computers confiscated, would you have just gone ahead? Was that a risk you were willing to take? And don't forget, if they investigate the FCC, who's legally responsible for the FCC? It's the board. The board is legal. It's not the Press Freedom Committee. It's not the staff. It's the board. The board is the one who would be investigated and potentially get a 6 a.m. knock at the door. That's it. Were you ready? I mean, look, everybody has their own level of risk. And I tell this to all of our journalism students, as Sharron knows, every journalist has to take their own level of risk. What risk are you willing to take? And the question is, look, if I were going to go on Twitter and criticize, if I weren't on the board and I weren't president, sure, I would have criticized the decision, canceled, but I didn't have the luxury of taking a stand. The board had to take a decision. And we made that decision. I thought, it was regretful, but it was the best decision in the interest of the club.
I'm sure we'll get into this more in the Q&A
Sure.
portion. But lastly, before the Q&A, I wanted to ask Keith and Sharron, from your perspective as journalism educators, and Sharron, you've touched on this a bit already, but I wanted to ask you about how your—
Excuse me, Jennifer, it's better that after Chair that I would like to express some feelings about the human rights.
Absolutely, yeah.
So to let the Sharron go first? Oh, I speak now? It's good.
Why don't you speak first?
Okay. Well, actually, the Keith have not disclosed who get most prize of the human
I've never
rights
said
award.
anything.
Okay.
I'm not disclosed it.
For rumors saying that the Star News get most, okay, saying that we've got around 8 to 9 awards. Well, I remember that when police finished to search my home in Taipo, and I told the press outside, I've said that the Star News is making a professional news all the way, and this cannot be changed, and this cannot be reversed by any other or means of crimes or accusation. I've said before. For me, that this year's Human Rights Prize is the last chance for my ex-colleagues to obtain the recognition from their hard work within the past year. This is not only the certificate for them, it also some recognition of their work. I'm confident that they will have a chance to get other prize in news competition, but this is the last time that they can using and getting this prize by the name of Stand News. This and Stand News is for their views and also my views, is a perfect platform for we have free mind and it's border free. Okay, we can do the news story, we can do the news story, whatever we wish. So for example, saying that the one of the awarded video clips is about the closure of Apple Daily. On that day, that my young colleagues, ex-colleagues, work for around 16 hours. I remember that they still work hard when I leave the office in early 5 a.m. on that day. Honestly, I understood what Keith saying and how the FCC governors considered, because the same discussion or the similar discussion, the similar dilemma and the contradiction that I've met and experienced in the past years also. But for me, that that some of my scholars have raised a undersigned. So I still think that if Keith or the FCC Board of Governors can have a good dialogue with them, I still hope that the prize that the Stand News get to this year can still be delivered, or they can still be priced in the future. That's all my feeling. Thank you.
I'll just add, as I mentioned, Dr. Jeff Timmermans at Arizona State University did say in his announcement that all winners will be recognized. But
Okay.
FCC won't have anything to do with it.
Okay.
But I have heard that all winners will be recognized, and it was a sad decision to make. And some people, by the way, have asked me, did you consult with the judges or did you consult with the previous winners? And the answer was no, because they didn't have any responsibility for the decision. The board had the responsibility to make the decision. So
I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A, but very quickly, I just wanted to ask our speakers, what would you say to young people who aspire to be journalists in Hong Kong? Sharron, do you want to go first?
You're the teacher.
No, let Sharron answer. Sharron, I can answer that one.
I mean,
She's grading papers now. So
yes, I am. And yet I'm still, I still, my firm belief is that the next generation really, that we pass along the stewardship of free expression to is going to be critical. And so there's a short list, a non-exhaustive list of, what remains in Hong Kong. Hong Kong still has a proud lineup of the biggest names in the global news industry, most of which have their headquarters here. It's also home to lots of award-winning correspondents and anchors, some of the world's largest publishers. And of course, the city itself has become something that is, for better or for worse, the story. So there is a narrow view of what remains in Hong Kong and what will still drive young journalists and reporters to Hong Kong to report. So that's kind of inner instinct of storytelling and reporting from the scene of a really, really active space in terms of challenges to press freedom, free expression. Those are all still very compelling stories and times for journalists. I guess the caveat to what remains is, what can still be lost in Hong Kong. And that, of course, includes, educational institutions that have, award-winning global staff who are still teaching the the international values, standards, and norms of the profession. That still remains, but for how long? And so we have to, as instructors, ensure that we are, delivering to our students the same kind of program and studies that, even though the risks change and there are now these areas of uncertainty, there are some fundamentals that remain the same wherever you go globally. I guess, what do I tell young students? Most of them, the good news is when they come to us, they have what I call a why. So they know why they want to report. They know why they want to tell the stories of their times. And when they have the why, the question of how sometimes becomes secondary. That's something you learn on the ground.
Ronson, anything to add?
Well, for my personal views that we need new blood, we need young reporters all the way. But this is a dilemma for the young reporters, because after their graduation, they have to choose where they work. If they work in the mainstream media, that it obviously that they will have many borders or many red lines that they have to be followed, and they will do the job not very comfortably. But if they work in a relatively independent news agency, that yes, you may cover or do your story whatever you like, but you may have chance to getting arrested or charged, and you never know how and when you have to face such challenges. So I think it's not an easy question.
Keith, anything to add before we go to Q&A?
Just very quickly, I would say that this coming September at HKU, as Sharron knows, we're going to have the largest Master of Journalism class that we've ever had in our 25 years of existence. So people are still interested in coming here and still interested in studying journalism. Undergraduate, we don't know yet because those numbers are still kind of in flux. Undergraduate, I'm a little bit more worried about because I think there are fewer high school kids in Hong Kong, and many of those who are graduating want to go overseas. So I do worry about the tapering off among the undergraduate program, but our Master's of Journalism program is stronger than it's ever been.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take some questions. I know we have some media here. Just to let you know, Keith and Ronson are going to be available next door after this event to answer questions. So I'm going to focus on questions from the audience. Do we have any? Yes.
Wow. David Lawrence.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. David Lawrence, Associate Member of the FCC. I'd like to ask this question. What attempts have been made, if any, by the various Hong Kong journalists associations or the colleges that teach journalism to seek clarification from the Hong Kong government as to what is allowed or what is not allowed under the national security law? Has any of those organizations, for example, gone to the government PR department to seek clarification?
Maybe Sharron could answer
Yeah,
that.
Sharron, do you want to take that?
So I, full disclosure, am not a member of the FCC or the HKJA. So I am perhaps, less informed than our two co-panelists on what efforts have been made to engage government in this. But it is clear, if these, if my view is even, modestly correct, if we don't have this precise elaboration, if we don't know what is sensitive, if we don't have a transparent and predictable legal landscape, a landscape that conforms to the standards of international treaties to which Hong Kong is a signatory, in the absence of all of these certainties, what we will have is a city that will find itself in a continual kind of spiral of professional decline. So,
Well, this question is clear that I remembered in around 2021 and something, that in a press conference, Ms. Carrie Lam have answered this question. She said, you guys journalists understand the red lines most. When after we asked her, that the colleagues and the media friend asked her, what is the red line for the national security law of Hong Kong? She said, you guys, the journalists, understood it most. It's meaningless to ask it, honestly. No need to ask, no need to write any letters, any confirmation or any clarification document to get the clear lines of all the red lines of it. Yes, you may get it, honestly. When you're going to the trial of the Apple Daily case or Daniel's case, and if you got the document from the court, which I cannot disclose here, of course I've read it before, you will find that. I cannot go in detail, but I can say, I can tell you that in the extreme case that no criticism can be made. You criticize anything that can be treated as suspicious, and it becomes your crime and accusation. The answer is very clear.
I forgot to mention, since this is being recorded, please do identify yourself and your organization. So thank you, David Lawrence, for doing that. And yes, I can't quite see, but
Emily?
Emily.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Emily Lau of the Democratic Party. I'm an associate member, and I'm also former chair of the Hong Kong Journalists Association many years ago. Jennifer, you talk about Hong Kong's ranking in press freedom has tumbled to 148. I don't know what is the ranking of our human rights, but I do know that the human rights situation in Hong Kong will be under scrutiny at the United Nations Human Rights Committee in July, because the government has to submit report. They have submitted report on the ICCPR, how it's being implemented. But now this is coming to the close of end of May. We haven't seen any organization in civil society saying they are going to go to the UN to make representation. And I don't know whether the HKJA and the FCC will make representation to the Human Rights Committee about press freedom and freedom of expression in Hong Kong. In fact, what Keith told us about the Human Rights Award saga would make very vivid, very exciting presentation before the Human Rights Committee. So I want to ask whether the two of you and Sharron and others think that going to the UN to talk about the implementation of the ICCPR in Hong Kong is a red line? Is that is something that we will not touch anymore? Thank you.
Well, some former JA chairperson, they have when he or she went to the UN before, and he or she got the criticism from the liaison office or the diplomat commissioner. So I don't think we are willing. Even I think I'm bravery, but I don't think I will go to UN to say anything about Hong Kong, the press or speech freedom matters. But of course, we still can have we still can ask how the report of the government submitted, how will they describe it for the freedom, and we can give some opinion to them. I think we can do it. But if you say that, okay, Ronson or the forthcoming, the new chairperson of JA, will he or she going to UN to express the views about the press freedom? I don't think so.
I would defer to my lawyer, Sharron.
This is such an important question and territory to highlight, because it is the case. I mean, Hong Kong, formerly a very rich civil society, and not just civil society, but academic institutions also, worked together to build, very robust reporting and shadow reporting documents to provide at the HRC. am not aware of a single group of what remains of Hong Kong civil society that is willing to take the risk to go before the United Nations and potentially, make a comment that is deemed too sensitive or too dissenting in nature, to then find themselves either, not able to return to Hong Kong, or if they're within Hong Kong, potentially attracting attention in the space of collusion with foreign forces. So that is, how critically sensitive the space is right now. The idea that this once vibrant community is completely silenced and is unwilling to speak before an international human rights body it's very, very, it's a profound loss for Hong Kong. And it's a great blow to what remains of press freedom in the city.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Straight in the back there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hillary. I'm a reporter with Hong Kong Free Press and a member of the FCC. I have two questions regarding the scrapping of the Human Rights Press Awards, one for Keith and one for Ronson. My question for Keith is that you said just now that people who have left Hong Kong and who are in faraway places like New York and in London has criticized the FCC's decision to suspend the awards. And you said that they accused the FCC of kowtowing to the government. But this criticism isn't just coming from abroad. So how would you respond to local journalists in Hong Kong working for local media who are disappointed and feel that the FCC is kowtowing to the government despite its relative privilege and protection as a club of foreign journalists? And my question for Ronson is, what was your reaction to the FCC deciding to suspend the awards? And as a journalist from Hong Kong, working in local media, how do you understand local media's relationship with foreign media? And do you think that foreign news outlets or institutions like the FCC have a responsibility or a duty to speak up during times that local media cannot? Thank you.
Go first, yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah, first of all, I would just quibble with the question a bit. If local journalists are saying that the FCC has some position of privilege or protection, I don't think we have any position of privilege or protection. I think people were waiting for us to do something that they could come after the FCC. So the idea that we should somehow, do something that knowingly might violate the law or knowingly might invite the police to investigate us just because we think we're somehow above being investigated by the police, I don't really buy that argument. I understand that some people were making that argument, but again, I just went to the board of governors and they thought about this thoroughly. It's 15 out of 16 members of the board of governors, including 9 correspondent members and 2 journalist members, all agreed that we couldn't go forward with the awards. Now I know it's easy to second guess because people weren't in the room. There were plenty of things I was able to tell the board in the meeting that I wasn't able to say, that I can't say publicly here, but I said it in the Press Freedom Committee meeting where I spelled out exactly what the potential laws we might be breaking were. And I spelled that out to the board, and the board unanimous -1. So 15 voted, yes, we can't go forward. One who was the chair of the Press Freedom Committee, unfortunately, said, well, I can't agree with this, so he resigned. But I mean, but the idea that somehow, I heard this before, one of the people who resigned from the Press Freedom Committee was in the bar, having a drink, and we had a nice conversation about this. And this person told me, well, we should have gone ahead. They wouldn't really have done anything again. We're the FCC. They wouldn't dare touch us. To which I said, they just arrested a 90-year-old cardinal. What are you talking about? Of course they would go after the FCC. So the idea that we have some kind of privileged position or some kind of protection because we're foreigners, I don't buy that at all. So anyway, so yeah, no, we made the best decision we could based on the interests of the club. But Ronson, what was your reaction?
Well, I treated Keith and FCC as our allies when I was just becoming the chairperson of HKJA. I think that that we two institutions are needed to fight for the press freedom and freedom of speech all the time. But and I know the members of the Press Freedom Committee of FCC also. I thank them. I thank you they very much. And when they're trying to to push, I would like to use the word, to push FCC to still hold the Human Rights Award. But honestly, very honestly, from my personal, when Keith and FCC talk about the responsibility of the Human Rights Award solely, they take up it solely. We understand we JAA are suffering in the great pressure on still joining to hold it. I honestly have no ground to blame FCC that they after consider a series of a consideration that they think they still threatening with this award, what being accused or being arrested for presenting the prize or announce the prize. But I would just hope that if we have next time that if any problem is happened, that we can know it earlier on that. And honestly, if I'm in the position of Keith, saying that I'm working in Vietnam and I'm the FCC in Vietnam, and what should I do anything that I have been threatened to get arrested from Vietnam authority? I may say that I won't do so also. So honestly, that's right. That Hong Kong people's freedom should be fighted by the Hong Kong people.
We're a bit over time. I guess we can take
One more? Yeah.
one more question. Yes, in the corner.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, no.
Hi, Arjun Sani from the founder and editor-in-chief of the Canadian International School student newspaper. Duly accompanying rights is the discussion of responsibility. How do you envisage the responsibility of young journalists shifting over the next 10 to 15 years?
That's a good one for Sharron.
Sharron, how do you envision the responsibilities of young journalists shifting in the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, I mean, I don't want to put any undue pressure on young journalists. As excited as I always am to meet them in the university and to see their, resilience and integrity. I think it's the answer to this is what's the responsibility of the profession, right? So, and that should be a shared responsibility. And of course, young journalists can be even more vulnerable if they are working in a climate which is, the hallmark is uncertainty. And so what it's going to take for young journalists is, of course, having that keen instinct, right? Being resourceful, resilient, being a solutions-driven individual, and also having, either senior editors or staff, or even, potentially your former academic advisors, that you have to understand that it's the community that will support you. So when I speak about the kind of where the stewardship of press freedom will go, and why it's very important that young people take up this stewardship and continue to kind of press for these rights and freedoms, then what I'm not saying is that you should do that alone or without guidance or without a long lens, at least, and a network of support and community to help you in that. What I see, though, when I look at students who are younger every year, and of course that's just the nature of this profession, is that perhaps I'm like very, very blessed in my cohort, but what I have seen is consistently individuals, people who represent really the best and the most dedicated in the profession and in the classroom. These are people who love Hong Kong, who have a good deal of civic pride. They want the best for society. So it's not, we shouldn't put an extra burden on young journalists to say, you need to take up the charge, you need to be brave. All of these expectations are quite unrealistic, especially if you are, looking at the climate in Hong Kong presently. So I think it's a professional obligation that we hope that the young generation understands the challenges that we've gone through in this climate, and that they understand how to do things better, because that's just, how society should work. The younger generation is who we're going to entrust.
Anything to add?
I just wanted to recognize we have a representative from Hong Kong Press Photographers Association here. So they're right on the front lines.
iPhone. Chairperson.
Chairperson, Hong Kong Press Photographers. So they're your partner organization.
Yes. Your friends.
So thanks for coming.
Anything else?
That's it. Again, I mean, I think there is still press freedom in Hong Kong. In answer to the question on the on the agenda, it's hanging by a thread. It's in danger. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think we need to hold the government to its feet. They can't just get away saying, we have press freedom because it's in the basic law. Because, if you look around, I mean, it's almost every country in the world has press freedom in its constitution, but it doesn't mean anything. North Korea has press freedom in its constitution. Look it up, because I have, but it doesn't mean anything. What matters is how it's practiced on the ground. And as I mentioned, if visas are being weaponized against foreign journalists who need visas, if people can't ask questions at press conferences without being harassed, if the government officials are going to spend time writing letters that contain veiled threats to the outlets that they don't like, if they're going to cut off access to information, then press freedom is being eroded. And I think we should hold them to how they practice it, not just letting them get away with repeating, oh, it's already protected because it's in the basic law. That basic law is meaningless if it's not practiced and protected in real practice.
Well, sorry that I kind of get the question clearly. Then.
The question was, what are the responsibilities of young journalists? How will the responsibilities of young journalists shift in the next 10 to 15 years?
I don't have a clear answer to you. If you choose to study journalism and choose to be a journalist, this is the big prize for us already. No need to get any further more responsibility. I hope that, like Keith, there's teachers will tell you what you should do.
All right, well, thank you again to all of our speakers for this great discussion today, and thanks to everyone in the audience for coming. So great to see you in person again, and we hope to see you soon, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a gift for Ronson.
For me only.
I don't get one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a photo altogether. Yes.
Look.
Okay. You too.
Good job.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, mask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes.